Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, and book by book through the entire Bible. We are currently in the book of Genesis, chapter 1. We're starting at the beginning. And also, again, we are crawling through the first 11 chapters because there's so much to unpack here. So we've been studying the days of creation. The days of creation. And again, so that we could understand and get the full impact, what it is not, in other words, the Genesis account is not a scientific account. And it's not even an historical account from the standpoint of how you would tell history. It is God's account. And there's the reason why God is telling it this way. So the idea is that the proclamation really is God created the heavens and the earth. And there are those critics who would criticize the order, some of the things in the book of Genesis, the order of creation, and how they would say that it could not happen this way. Well, it could if it was God. Remember, as I said, imagine if God right now wanted to do what he did for Earth for Jupiter or Saturn or Pluto, right? Think about Pluto. We lost Pluto as a planet for a minute, and now I think the outcry was so great that it's been reclassified again as a planet. But let's just say God wanted to say, I'm going to make Pluto another Earth. So think about this. What would God have to do? Now, scientists have ideas. I don't, because I'm not a scientist, but think about God starting his work on Pluto. So again, think of the days of creation. And one other bit that we need to understand is that the focus of not only Genesis, but the entire Bible is God's plan and purpose for man on this earth. That is why, if you think about this, let's say doing the gospel, doing the life of Jesus. We knew about Rome. Rome is mentioned, but not often, right? In other words, there's a whole Roman Empire out there that we're not really, that the Gospels is not even dealing with. Why? Because that wasn't the purpose. It was focused on the life of Jesus, the life and ministry of Jesus, okay? So the days of creation are, the focus is God's plan and purpose for man, and then as he is going to tell the revelation, give us a revelation. Remember, Moses is writing some 2,500 years after these events by the revelation of God, by the inspiration of God. All right. So I think it's important to understand that because, like I say, there are critics who try to put the framework of creation or the biblical account as the biblical account as a scientific book, and there are some Christian theologians, Christian apologists that don't help the matter either, because they try to compete. They try to take the Bible and compete it as if it was, and it's not. So so that's why we have things such as the gap theory, day age kind of theology, and that's not the focus of the Bible. Whether or not it's the Genesis account really should not be used to try to refute scientific claims. That is not the aim of the biblical account. The aim of the biblical account is God created the heavens and the earth. And I believe it. I believe God's claims. Okay? I think you get into a lot of trouble when you try to insert the biblical text as a scientific text, and it just, I think you can lose the argument. Okay, people try, apologists try, but you can't. Now, there are Christian scientists that can argue, more on a scientific level, and God bless them. I love listening to them because I'm not qualified to do that. But what I could say is this, and I'll say this again, that there is no scientific claims that has disproven the claims of the Bible. Okay, so that's, all right, so we left off on the fourth day with God creating now it's kind of interesting if we go back in verse, let me go back to verse 14, because there's three things that God is saying here. And let's go back. It says, verse 14, then God said, now it's interesting, and this is probably one of the points that people would make, is that look at verse 11 when it said, God said, let the earth produce vegetation, and then he comes and says in verse 14, let the lights be for the expanse of the sky, right? And then you see in the next day he creates the sun and the moon, and then it says and the stars also. So sometimes they would argue life could not exist in that fashion, which is again not true when you're dealing with God. In other words, God could make things and then start turning things on, right? So again, my point is that it's not an argument to disprove. We don't know what this expanse was, talking about the universe expands. In other words, again, remember I said in one session there is creation, and then there's the creation of the universe, and then there's creation of man. The creation is everything that God created. Everything outside of God is creation. He created it. God exists outside of the universe. Imagine the screen that you see here is where God's exist, right? The universe, imagine, is just like mouse, right? So just kind of think this. I'm just trying to give you an idea. God exists outside. We exist inside the expanse of the universe. Okay. So we don't know what that was before. So as the Genesis account comes, God is doing whatever it is He's doing. So for example, let's fast forward to Revelations 22, 21 and 22, where also Peter says God is going to create a new heavens and a new earth. A new heavens and a new earth. That's the universe. But outside of here, right, God still exists. He just creating the universe. So how would He do that at that time? That He's going to create a new heavens and a new earth. All right, so so He creates on the fourth day the sun and the moon, the sun for daylight and the moon for night, right? And it's and that light still permeates. Okay, so verse 20. He says, verse 20, and God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures. And then he said, and let the birds fly above the earth in the open firmament of the heavens. So there's two things that's going on the fifth day. God is creating marine life, and he's also creating, what is the term for birds and stuff? You know, the birds, which we know that there's millions of different species, kinds of birds, right? Verse 21. And God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moveth, wherewith the waters swarm, after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. So there's two things going on here. I forgot what the study of birds is, what that's called, but he creates both the marine life, all the sea creatures, right? And there are millions of creatures. There's stuff that we're still discovering, because with the Pacific Ocean, which is the largest ocean, but any ocean, you know, you have, I want to say, somewhere around 5 miles depth at the deepest. Don't hold me to that figure though, but it's deep. The problem with that, the depth, however, is the pressures at the water. We couldn't survive the pressures of the water, right? There are some submarines now that could survive those pressures. They're small. An average submarine, I think, couldn't survive more than anywhere from, I want to say, 500 to 800 feet. I shouldn't be saying that because I'm not for sure on that. But the pressure would just squeeze it, okay? And yet there are millions of creatures that God created. See, that's their atmosphere. It's kind of interesting. That's how they survive. Now, what is interesting, of course, that they can survive there. We're still discovering some of these things. Like, we've never seen this before. As we can send robots down, and then they discover this. It's just kind of awesome, right? Then we see the birds. Think about how God now created the birds. It is as natural for them to fly as it is for the fish to swim. We just walk. You know, we have to use machines and stuff, but we walk. But so I'm going to go to verse 22. It says, so God blessed them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, that the birds multiply upon the earth. Evening came, and morning, the fifth day. So you see the birds. Now, again, people may try to take issue with the fact, how could that be? God is doing both sea creatures, marine life, and birds. Now think about that. Why? Well, that's probably the way God wanted to do it. Think about this too, for a critic's sake. Does it matter? If you're God, by the way, does it matter? Okay, so he tells them to be fruitful and multiply. Same thing he would tell man later. In other words, one of the things that by the way, this being fruitful and multiply, this principle here, God hates when any of his creation doesn't produce fruit. And you see that when Jesus goes to a fig tree and he cursed the fig tree because it doesn't have fruit on it. Verse 24, then God said, let the earth produce living creatures according to their kind, livestock, creatures that crawl, and the wildlife of the earth according to their kind. And it was so. So God made the wildlife of the earth according to their kind, the livestock according to their kind, and the creatures that crawl on the ground according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. Now I take this to be the insects, all kinds of insects, and insects, but notice all kinds of the apes, right? I mean, just all the, put it like this: animals, the animal kingdom, what you would see in a zoo, right? Now the difference is that these all are air breathing. These are all air breathing, breathing air, you know. So at this point now, the earth is created. The earth is stocked, right, with all kinds of creatures. Now just think about this. All kinds of creatures. Now keep this in mind. This is before sin. We're really going to get into what sin did to this planet creation. But at this point, you know, everything is pure, everything is innocent. When he says wildlife, animals at this point were not dangerous. We also, remember, get a glimpse of this in the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. When he comes and he's going to reign on the earth for 1,000 years. Okay? The millennial reign. And during that time, now, when you see this picture here in Genesis, and then you see what sin did. So we've had deserts. Remember, the land produced, right? Everything we see here, the land produced. Remember that, right? God created the trees, the plant life, with the seed in it. It produced. He spoke to it, be fruitful and multiply. The land produced. We're going to see even later that it produced of its own, okay, of its own. Man did not have to work the ground before sin. Adam, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but Adam would have enjoyed this world with no curse. So, no lions, worried about lions or bears or snake bites or anything like that. Right? So at this point, when God says it's good, understand now the definition of good, pure, the way God intended. That's going to change, of course. But so those are the 5 days where the heavens and the earth, the firmament, the sky, the hydrological cycle, plant life, animal life, bird life, all this is now created. So in the next study, we're going to get into the creation of man. Okay, the creation of man. So we're getting into that. All right, guys, I will see you in the next study. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.